So firstly, can I say, what I'd really like to know is, what would you like to achieve in your first year as leader, and how do you feel that you would go about that?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity to set this out. I think it's a really innovative way of approaching a leadership contest. So thank you for being part of it. And I'll start by saying, I think, let's be clear. The party needs to change. The Lib Dems are now at 6% in the polls. That's half of what we got at that general election in December. And the general election review said that we have had a long-term decline actually since before 2010. That's a decade of the party moving backwards. So the case for change is not just necessary, it's essential. And my view is that liberal ideas could be and should be more popular than ever before, because COVID-19, in the way that it's exposed the deep inequalities in our society, has changed people's minds about how things used to be. They want change, and this is our huge opportunity, which leads me on to the 3 key priorities that I want to do in my first year as leader. And the first is that we need to answer that question: what are we for? I want to set out a forward-looking, progressive and green agenda for the party, one that will regain the trust of the electorate and show that we are credible. The Liberal Democrats are at our best when we are fizzing with ideas. Paddy used to describe it in that way. And we need to show that we have those ideas that can transform Britain after this COVID pandemic and create a fairer and more inclusive society. People are saying that they don't want to go back to how things were, and we need to show them that we are a party committed to moving things forwards together in a new direction. And my 3 priorities of quality education, the environment and the economy all reinforce that overall message. And I've demonstrated that I can get cut through that we need in the media to get that message effectively across. The second area that we have to focus on is to get that general election review implemented. Its findings chime strongly with the feedback that I've had from right across the party. I've listened to hundreds of local parties over the last couple of months. But one critical issue that needs resolving very quickly is what the review called the 3-legged stool problem. And I'm clear that whilst I will have a leading role to play as party leader, of course I will, the buck stops here, but it's also clear that there is an important role for the CEO and the president, and that we have to work effectively as a team. I am a team player. That is what I do. And I will work with them and the party staff, the committees, the states, the regions, to deliver on the very coherent approach that's been set out in that review. And finally, and this is surely why we're all here, isn't it? We need to win, and we have to concentrate on winning at every level. That means working across the party to agree an effective campaign plan right up through to the next general election. But it starts by having a sharp focus on maximising our gains this coming May. I won my seat of Oxford West and Abingdon by winning over thousands of voters from the Conservative, Labour and the Green parties. We need to build our local campaign by winning council seat after council seat after council seat. We now run the Vale of Whitehorse District Council, and we have to listen to campaigners across the country to get our campaigning out there by supporting them and making sure that this volunteer force, this human infrastructure that we have, is at its most honed. And we do that by improving training available to our campaigners across the country.
Thank you. Stephen.
I was going to ask what personally drives you to want to be the leader?
Because, Stephen, I want to make the world a better place. I mean, bluntly, I was a teacher before I was an MP. Most of my career was outside of Westminster. But what drew me to politics was when I was teaching, I discovered, having had a very international background, I'd lived in places like Ethiopia, Jamaica, Jordan, places that had real poverty. And in our country, we have enormous educational but also societal inequality. That means, you know, tonight there will be children who will go to bed hungry, and this has been my driving force right from the beginning. I want to make real change. And I love our party. I'm ambitious for our party. And I believe that the Liberal approach has the answers. It has the answers to the change that the country is crying out for. But at the moment, I'm also disappointed. I'm disappointed that we aren't further ahead than where we are. And I'm frustrated that at this time, when our country needs us the most, we haven't got a bigger parliamentary arm, that we're not running more councils. And the reason why we have to do that is because that is how we are going to help people, particularly now. So I want to stand for leader because I believe that the party needs to refresh itself. It needs to embrace the change that needs to come in order for us to be that winning force that we are again. And I've got a track record of doing it. I'm happy in my seat. We've got a strong base from which to build here. And now I want to take what we did in Oxford, West and Abingdon, winning seats, particularly against the Tories, out across the whole of the party, not just in England, but also in Wales and Scotland too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hattie.
Layla, building on some of the things you've just said, some might say that the most important job the leader does is to lead the party politically. So creating our Liberal vision and communicating that beyond conference and our immediate walls as a party. How will you reach the public? And why should we think you are particularly well equipped to do that?
Thank you, Hattie. Well, first of all, that bit in your question where you say we have to, sort of re-communicate what liberalism is, I could not agree more. My first instinct after the last election, in fact, was to create this connection, to understand from the voters themselves, in a sense, going out and, doing market research. Where are we going wrong? What isn't working? And so I went door knocking, and I went to Yorkshire, I went to Kent, I went to Devon and Cornwall, to Wales, seats where we don't currently hold MPs. I was about to go to Scotland and then COVID-19 intervened, sadly. But this is the approach I want to take, to go out and speak to the voters themselves, to gather that information that you need. Because as a leader, you have to develop an instinct, an emotional instinct almost sometimes, for where people are, so that we can translate our brilliant policies. And boy, do we have lots of brilliant policies as a party. But I see the job of the leader as to be able to translate those policies in a way that's compelling to people when you're talking to them on a door. And that's very much the approach. But door knocking's not enough. And we know that so many people only get the view of a political party through the leader, through the media. And that is something that I have a proven track record of doing. Actually, right from the minute I was elected in 2017, I was very early on had the opportunity to do, the question times, the Andrew Neil interviews. That I've done the lot. But the other thing that I think I bring to the table is that I can work with a broad range of media to get stuff done. Because what I was hearing on the doors was two things. First of all, people don't trust us. And I think coalition was one part of it, but the revoke policy was another. And we need to regain that trust. But the second was they wanted us to show them, why bother voting Lib Dem? How are you credible? And I see the media as a partner in that. And I've, in the last few months, delivered a scheme called the Coronavirus Compensation Scheme by using the media to do that. We reached out across the House, bringing on backbench Tory MPs, people who you wouldn't normally associate with the Lib Dem campaign, came on board this idea that was given to me, in fact, by one of my constituents, so a very Lib Dem way of starting a campaign. But we really delivered because we partnered and they came to us. This is the thing I found most interesting. I nearly fell off my chair, I'm not going to lie. The Daily Express newspaper, normally known for only including me because I'm a whiny Ramona, contacted me and said, we love this campaign. We are going to put it on the front page for 5 days running. They then used their one question at the number 10 briefing to push the Prime Minister and to push Matt Hancock into doing it. And I'm delighted to say that as a result of this campaign that I started, the country now gives £60,000 to those NHS and social care workers and their families who tragically pass away because of COVID-19. And we have to use every lever that we've got to make change. We are not in government now. We are the fourth force in Parliament. What we need is a leader who can use the media, who can use Parliament to achieve change now in the circumstances that we're in. And I have a proven track record of being able to do that.
So that pretty much takes over my next question, which was going to be, how do you get the cut through for the media? Because in fact, the problem we have had as a party is being irrelevant.
Yeah, indeed.
Actually, it's how do we get the media to pay attention? Because unless we can get them to pay attention, nobody knows we're alive almost.
Yeah, and what I will point out, I mean, I think we've also got to be quite creative about this. I mean, we are, for example, maybe focusing right now on mainstream media. And one of the things I have been able to do, I mean, I'm the only Lib Dem who's been on Have I Got News for You in Lord knows how long. I think the last was when Nick Clegg hosted it. So we have to also use other types of media, get into other formats that we can put our message across. And I think one of the areas that we are a bit weaker is in social media as a party. I was one of the first MPs to sort of tweet about my first-hand experience in the House, to use Instagram. We need to find a way of circumventing some of those barriers that we may have. So whilst on the one hand, I do point to, I think, a strong track record of the mainstream media. I've appeared on 5 front pages in the last 2 weeks alone from across the political spectrum. So I know how to do that, but it's not enough. We also need to be employing social media and learning actually from the way that other parties campaign now. I think our party has gone a little bit behind the curve when we used to be in front of the curve. So I'd really love to see us lead in social media rather than trailing behind as we have been.
So what would you then say in social media? Why would the average person today vote Lib Dem?
Because they want a different country. I mean, this is the opportunity that I spoke about in my opening statement about coronavirus. There is a real appetite there for people who are doing things differently. And at a time when people, I mean, I don't know about you, but my friends and family, the ones who aren't politically motivated, and there's a lot of them, I mean, you know, they just don't really feel that Westminster speaks for them. They feel that there's no one in Westminster that they can relate to, that they can feel that, you know, they can know that their point of view is put across. And I think that's the space for our party. You know, we have to carve out a new political space right now. And if you look across at Boris Johnson, you know, who's an utter charlatan, but, you know, is a showman and nevertheless is no good on the substance. You've got Keir Starmer, and I actually very much appreciate the way that he has that sort of forensic, calm approach to holding Boris Johnson to account. The question for us as a party is, who is the leader who's going to carve out a new space? Because unless we can carve out that new space, then we aren't going to get that message across. And liberalism, to me, the elevator pitch for liberalism, you know, on the door, what does it mean? Mm-hmm. It's all about freedom. You know, it's about their background to thrive in themselves, to lead the lives that they want. But in order to do that, we also recognize that we have to have, you know, strong public services, we have to embrace diversity, and we have to have an open, tolerant society that is outward looking and internationalist in order to do it. We do things differently to the other parties, that bottom-up approach rather than top-down. We have such an incredible offer to give them. Liberalism, people don't know what it is anymore. We need to revive it for this century. We need to find a new way to communicate that. And I think the way that I have done that already in the last 3 years puts me in a very good position to now take us forward as a modern, progressive, forward-looking party that we need to be to capture new votes again.
Thank you. Stephen.
So this is about resources, okay? So without the resources to spend, we can't fight and win elections. Mm-hmm. So how would you improve our fundraising and our other sources of income?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think there's 2 parts to this. I mean, first of all, we have to try and keep on board all those donors, those fantastic donors who gave us so much money at the last election because of our strong Stop Brexit stance. And the reason they did that was because there was this desire to stop what is going to be a catastrophic thing for our country. And I think the worry I have is that now that Brexit has got to the point it has, we are going to have donors who are going to feel, well, what's the point? You know, shouldn't I be giving to someone else? We have to keep them on board. And I think that's partly about showing them that we are delivering now, and showing them that we are relevant and credible as a party now, and that we need to be encouraging also new donors to come across. And that's something that I'm very, very good at. I think we should be reaching out into parts of industry that we maybe haven't before. Gaming industry being a really good example, the creative industry where we've had a natural strength in the past. These are industries that we should have natural affinity to as a party, and we should be growing our donor base through them. But the very final thing I'll say is I think that there is a much more that we can be doing as a party to make our own membership part of that change. And it's not just about major donors. I mean, if you look at the 120,000 members that we have, and that's brilliant, you know, this is our highest ever membership, and it's wonderful that we've managed to keep hold of them even through this period. We should be able to raise more money from them, and we're not going to do it unless we can show them that by supporting the party we are going to make that difference, and that it is going to lead to winning more seats at council level, but also at the next general election. And that's what I'm relentlessly focused on. My own record in my seat here, but also in the surrounding seats of Oxfordshire, there's a good chance that at the next election actually we'll have 3 or maybe even 4 target seats just in my immediate area, because what I know how to do is not just to win against the Tories, but also how to grow other teams that do the same. We now need to kind of franchise out this model and make sure that in those 30 to 50 seats that we are credible in as a second place contender, particularly against the Tories, that we maximise that. I know how to do that, and that's what my relentless focus is going to have to be and will be over the next 5 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Layla, you started to speak there about your team, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. How would your team describe you as a leader?
Well, one of the things that I think is my biggest strength actually is my ability to bring out the best in the people around me. It's what I did for most of my career actually as a teacher, and I led teams all across my life. I was the youngest ever head of year in my school, and have been a manager of people and a bringer of ideas and people together to deliver things from the whole of my career. I ended up, in fact, before I was elected, being part of a senior leadership board in a social enterprise. And so there as well, I was managing the publishing arm of the party. I was dealing with major stakeholders, and I bring a wealth of experience outside of the parliamentary realm. But in terms of the team now, I mean, I would hope, say that too. My best quality is that I'm a listener. I'm very open to feedback and improvement. My own style is not to think that I know everything. I'm very aware of my strengths and my weaknesses in all parts of my life. And so I put things in place and I bring people around me who have a real sense of purpose, but who also feel empowered. And that applies as much to my chief of staff as it would be to the intern who is in my office. And I consider success in my team that when they leave, it's to go somewhere better, but they go feeling that they grew and they learned under my leadership. And the reason why this is important for the party is that the ethos and the vision and the way that the whole party interacts with itself is very much set by that tone that is set in the leader's office. The way that the leader interacts with the people immediately around them then has a cascade effect across the whole of the party. And if we are going to be a party that really lives our values of, you know, valuing diversity, of making everyone feel included, and we know that in the past we haven't always done this right, actually, I believe that this is why me as leader of the Lib Dems at this time is so critical, because we need to change the culture of the party to be one that's supportive, that's collaborative, that encourages creativity, so that as the insurgent force that we are, we can make the most of every single person who is a member and an activist of our party.
Layla, I don't disagree with any of that. I'd like to just push you, if I may, to be a little bit more specific. And I'd also like to ask you about, you've painted a picture of you as a leader. Tell us also about what happens when you're under pressure. You know, we've all been there.
Of course.
Things get a little bit frayed. What are the less positive qualities that come out for you when you're under pressure, and how do you handle those?
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, look, first of all, you don't take on a job like this necessarily for your health. The stress and the pressure that comes with it, I go into eyes wide open, and it's one of the reasons why I actively took the decision not to stand last time. I felt that I needed to really make sure that I was ready for the challenges that are coming. And actually, one of the things that I would say about me under pressure is that over the years, I have learned the signals of when it is perhaps getting a bit too much. And it's a feeling. It's one that I have, and I employ a work coach still now. I have a strong team around me where I can, as part of the way that we operate, we take time to reflect on what's going right and what's going wrong, so that when I need help, I'm not afraid of asking for it. And one of the things that I look for in the team around me, and I would hope all of them would agree, is that I ask them to be able to point out to me when they feel that there are moments where perhaps that stress is a bit too much and maybe I need to take some time out, and I listen to them. So I think work-life balance is an important part of it. I think being reflective about my situation that I'm in and asking for help is a big part of it. And I tend to actually be very quiet when that happens. I notice it's happening. I say to my team, look, I need half a day, I need a day, I need to go and do my yoga. I've taken up yoga in the last few years to start my day positively. And that means that I've got a sort of very strong support network around me, so that when I get into those moments of stress, they don't overwhelm me. And it means that I can be effective and efficient whilst being very honest with my team about where I am. And that's what we need as a party, I would argue now. I mean, we are going to come under enormous strain. The leader comes under enormous strain. There's competing priorities. There's always someone asking for a bit of your time. And actually, the best thing that I can do is to make sure that my own well-being and wellness is important. And I say that to all of my team, their well-being and wellness is important too, so that we can make sure when those moments of stress come, we are a support network for each other.
Thank you, Layla. Stephen.
Which current Lib Dem policy do you not agree with?
Ooh, do you know, that's a hard one, simply because I used to not agree with our nuclear policy, but I do now because it's changed. And actually the policies that we've got right now, I would say, are broadly there. It's often the framing of the policies that I have the issue with. Yeah. So a good example, I think, being our climate change policy, which is brilliant. You know, it was brought in last year, it's carbon neutral by 2045. The problem with it in the election wasn't the policy, and it's very, very well made, honest, very intellectually sound policy, as often our policy is. The problem is that we don't get cut through because it ends up looking a bit Goldilocks in the political landscape, and we just don't communicate the essence of what the policy is really trying to emotionally get across to the electorate. So I remember the Fridays for Future strikes that started last year. I was in Oxford, there were 2,000 children, it was so colourful and beautiful around me, was holding up signs saying, this is urgent, climate change is urgent, we need this party to do something. And off the back of that, I led the first debate on the floor of the House in 2.5 years on climate change, and invited Greta Thunberg with Ed Miliband and Caroline Lucas to Parliament. You know, we needed to do stuff like that are really high profile in the area. But then when it came to the election, we just didn't get the cut through. People didn't recognize that we had done that recently. And so I would like us to reframe that policy. And the way I'd like us to do it is to talk about not just carbon neutral, but what if we went a bit further and started to talk about what if we could be a carbon negative country. There's only one other actually in the world, it's Bhutan, and yes, very different to the UK. But the point about a framing like that is it would really get across to those young voters that I'm intent of recapturing as leader of this party. We have to recapture that young vote. That's how we're going to grow our base, is to have that sense of urgency as part of that policy. So don't change the policy, but change the framing. And I think you could argue that that applies across a lot of our different policy areas at the moment.
I think also, Layla, when you talk about that, the thing that I find interesting is that I think the structural change has been highlighted within the party, has been highlighted actually as well in the report, because I think we're too top heavy is something that's very apparent, and that makes us slow and it makes us clunky. But that does take an awful lot in order to change that. So how do you feel that you would achieve that as a leader?
Yeah, thank you. Well, this is critical. And the reason why it's critical, it comes back to what is it we need to do with the electorate? We need to regain trust and credibility. And when, as an organization, you don't live the values that you talk about, then there is a disconnect and a discord that I think the electorate can almost subliminally see. And we talk about, as liberals, investing in people and communities. We believe in a bottom-up democratic process. That's why we are bottom up, because you get better governance, you get better decision making. It speaks to our collaborative way of doing politics, the non-tribal way of doing politics. And yet in our party, we take the opposite approach. We're top down and we don't live those values. So how do we do it? Well, I think it starts by us being very clear that the part of a local party is to be a leader in the party. It isn't a hub and spokes where the hub is HQ and the leader and everyone else is further away. We need to empower local parties to deliver the change that we need to make us different and to make us more nimble. And some concrete examples of that is in this strategic review that we need to have, this strategy document that we need to now create between now and the next general election. Let's just take the one issue of diversity. And this was a clear theme throughout the general election review, which I absolutely agree with, very much chimes with my own experience as a candidate. My mother's of Palestinian heritage. I have to say some of the way that the party really has that focus away from embracing difference, despite the fact that that's not our values, has never been very helpful. But on diversity, we could say, right, let's just focus on the diversity of our parliamentary party. And that's what we did for a number of years. I was part of a leadership program that was meant to deliver that. And it by and large has worked for now, although I'd argue we still have an issue in our top target seats, that we are going to achieve that in the 30 to 50 seats that I'd hope we'd win at the next election. But we also have a pipeline issue. Yes. And if local parties don't themselves take responsibility for diversity within their own ranks, then we aren't ever going to actually solve this problem. So the challenge that I have set and would set as leader and continue to local parties is, do you represent the community that surrounds you? If you are a constituency party, and it's not just about gender balance, it's also about, if there's, for example, a large Hindu community in your local area, let's say there is a large council estate in your local area, when was the last time that you went there, not to just gather data for, whenever the next council election is, when was the last time you went there, had a slow conversation, really got to know that community, and actively over and over again asked them to come and join, and more than that, nurtured them so that they would sit on your campaign teams, stand for council, and be part of your own local executive? Now, I say this sounding like it's going to be easy, but it's not. And what this comes down to ultimately is recognizing that we are a volunteer force. It also comes back to the question that Stephen asked about resourcing. Our greatest resource is our human capital. We have all these members, but where is the training? Where is the ecosystem of learning, of activists, of campaigners? How do we make sure that they have the right knowledge and skills that they need to do what they need to do? And if I was to push on one thing to be delivered from HQ, it's that training, right down to the grassroots, so that when we set a target for local parties to help us deliver those bigger strategic aims, they are empowered to be able to do it. And that is us living our values. And I know that if we do it, it works.
Thank you.
Layla, I'd like to move on to talk about learning from mistakes and your resilience. Can you talk to us about the most serious thing you feel you've got wrong in your career and what you've learned from that?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because I'm very happy with the way that my career has gone. So I don't really feel there's any one part of it that's gone wrong, because it's led to where I want to be. And perhaps that is at the core of my resilience, because my mindset is always about, well, if I've got something wrong, that's just an opportunity to learn something, and I'm going to get it right next time. And it applies to all levels. I mean, before I was an MP, as I said, I was a teacher, and the two became linked after the 2015 general election, where, like so much of the party, I had campaigned my guts out between 2012 and 2015. And despite the fact that at the time Oxford West and Abingdon was an ultra marginal, only 167 votes between us and the Tories, we were swept away. And we had a mountain to climb. We had 10,000 votes. And my approach at that moment was actually the immediate aftermath. And I've always been open about talking about my mental health. I would say I was mildly depressed. And I took a year to really find my feet again. I got the support that I needed in my own life. And I realized that actually I really did want to make that change, but I needed to perhaps redefine what that might mean. Perhaps we wouldn't win Oxford back in one go. And so I then secured a job actually as a deputy head in a school in London, and that was what I was about to go and do. As it happens, luck intervened. But because I have the tools to bounce back, and that is what my whole life has been about. You know, I moved 9 different schools as a child. I've had overcome obesity, I've overcome depression, I've overcome all sorts of different challenges in my life. And what it's taught me is that if you take the approach of, well, I've had the knock, what can I learn? What help can I get? I find that I am very quick to bounce back. And what that meant was in 2017, when that opportunity arose, I was ready. And we did, quite unexpectedly, I should say, won the seat against the Tories. And we did that by rebuilding that team, that huge team that we built as part of 2015, by energizing them, by giving them that clear sense of purpose. And when I told my head that I wasn't going to be taking on the job of deputy head, she said, you know, Layla, I knew all along that you would do it, and it allows me to tell my board that I made a good hire, but there are bigger things destined for you. So she was really magnanimous and lovely. But yeah, I'm not afraid of challenge. In fact, I often welcome it. It's in times of challenge that we can grow. And I'd argue that is perhaps where the party is right now. We are going through a period of deep challenge, and this is our moment where we can choose to grow.
Thank you.
Can I come in with a question about diversity? Can I ask, what have you personally done to ensure diversity and inclusivity in your team? And I'm not talking about specific hires, I'm talking about a mindset or policy or approach.
Thank you. Well, when I talk about we need to set a sort of strategic direction for the party, I think that's also really important that as a party we set our values and ethos. This is a process that I've been through in my own team as an MP. The challenge being an MP is, of course, you're being pulled in all sorts of different directions at the time, but you are essentially managing 3 offices at the same time. And I'm intending, I hope, to take on a 4th as part of this process. So you have to have a way of communicating across the whole of the teams that makes everyone feel that they're part of something bigger than themselves. And so I went through a process of consultation with them. I brought in fact, an outside trainer. And I said, what we are going to do over the course of 2 months, we're going to have a real good look at how we operate, how we as a group feel about the way things are going, that people feel they're not being heard, and that's an equally important thing. You know, how do people feel that they're not included? To be able to have those conversations together. And as a result, we now have a statement that is up on the wall that actually primarily my staff came up with guidance from me about how we operate. And the line in it that I think is the most important bit is that our job is to support our community, but it's also to support each other. And if you create an environment where people feel that they are working together towards a greater aim, where they have that great sense of purpose, then that makes them resilient to knocks. It makes them much more attuned to each other. And it means that when, you know, big changes happen, or, you know, they have to deal with a particularly difficult case, which is often the case with my caseworkers, they have a clear sense of what it is that I would want them to do in that situation. So it's empowering, but it's bottom up, and they created it, and I'm really proud of it.
That sounds really amazing, and thank you for sharing that. The issue I'd like to, as a corollary, add on to that is that one of the things that we have absolutely learnt with the Black Lives Matter movement, George Floyd's murder, is that it has allowed conversations to happen that people of colour have very rarely been able to have, where it has always been, we don't have enough women in something because we don't have the right women. So we don't have enough people of colour in something because they just aren't the right people of colour, or they just aren't there, or they're not qualified.
Yeah.
And the one thing very clearly about the upper echelons of the administrative part of our party is that it is not welcoming visually for people of colour. Of people who don't fit a certain mold. And I think that that is something that really needs changing in order for us to pick up the massive number of votes that we should be getting from ethnic minorities and whatever we call people like me. Now.
Yes, indeed. I think I count too, or at least I'm told I do. You know, but even though, you know, and I couldn't agree more, because we are meant to be a party that values diversity, and this comes right back to that core. I've said it a number of times, and I'll keep saying it. We have to live our values, and we have to show that we live our values. And if we then talk about diversity when our own house isn't in order, then people are going to consider us not credible. So how as a party can we say that we care deeply about the Black Lives Matter movement, and yet, you know, we have upper echelons of the party, you're absolutely right, are all the same? You know, we absolutely have to challenge that. And I would argue my own diversity is a perhaps welcome difference in this, despite the fact that as part of this contest, there are some who are saying, oh no, we can't possibly have another woman. We've tried that. And that's been very disheartening to hear. And actually, I don't think is representative of the vast majority of our membership, but we just need to be mindful that even in our own membership, these conversations are happening. I've heard it as a candidate, I hear it from other candidates. I've spent actually a lot of my career supporting candidates, and particularly Black and minority ethnic candidates who are told, well, you know, X seat isn't really ready for a Black person. And we have to change this. So some of this is going to be changed by rolling out effective training, unconscious bias training. I think it's also about us holding up to a mirror to ourselves to say, guys, we should be doing better. And it's not just about tokenism. It's about recognizing that by having a diversity of voices in the room, we make better decisions. We explain it by going right back to the heart of what it means to be a liberal. And the reason we want to do it is because we want to change Britain. And if we're going to change Britain, we have to be attuned to all of Britain. I would also set us, by the way, another challenge, not just in terms of BME, but also in terms of background. We are disproportionately very well off and well educated as a party. And I would love to see us set some targets around encouraging people from other backgrounds who maybe don't normally associate themselves with politics at all, let alone the Liberal Democrats, who are seen by some as being a bit out of touch and elitist. Let's reach into those communities as well. And that comes, I think, right back to the answer I gave about how we do that. It's, you know, let's encourage local parties to take this on themselves. Do you represent the community that you want to champion? It's a very simple question, and I think by setting that challenge from the very top and showing from the very top that we live those values, then local parties will feel they'll want to do it as well.
Thank you.
May I just jump in there? Sorry, Geeta, to cut across you. I was very interested, Layla, in what you were saying about supporting candidates from different backgrounds, and you were describing work that you've done over your career to nurture talent. I wondered if you could just speak a little bit more about that, to give us some specifics.
Sure. I mean, the most recent, and there's been a number of different ways. I was the chair of the Parliamentary Candidates Association for some time, and in that work, I did a piece of work called the Real Cost of Running, where we looked at actually how much money it takes to be a candidate in our party. And I have to say, it was huge. I mean, we had stories of people who had remortgaged their houses in order to unsuccessfully stand in seats. And what it highlighted was why we end up with some of the socioeconomic discrepancies that we have in our party, because you have to have a certain level of financial resilience in order to stand in the first place. So we do need to address that, and those specific recommendations that we made in that for how to do it. More recently, in the 2019 general election, and this perhaps I hope speaks to who I am as a person. If I see a problem, I don't consider it someone else's problem to solve. I don't solve it myself. What often I do is I set someone else to solve it. But what we did in this case was notice that there were a lot, more than 50 first-time target seat parliamentary candidates who were, in the cut and thrust of this very, very divisive election, had not had a lot of the very basic training for how to be an effective candidate, and did not have the pastoral support either for how to do it. And I'd noticed this because of the connections across the party and campaigning for them. And so I set up a program in addition to what the party was already doing. We did it obviously in collaboration with the campaigns team, so we didn't step over anyone's toes. And when I say we, what I did was I recruited a donor who was interested in helping me to do this. I recruited trainers who are well respected in the party, who know what they're doing and have nurtured candidates before. And I set up a subgroup of the target seat group of these first-time target seat PPCs. We set up bespoke training at conference. We had weekly webinars where throughout the election we kept in touch, and we asked them every week, what do you want us to talk about? And it was very much led by them as to what skills they wanted to acquire. And the reason why I think that's an important thing to have done, and I was a little shocked it wasn't already happening, I have to admit, was that it has built resilience into that group. And if we are going to be serious about winning those number of seats that we need to at the next election, we need those candidates to remain in the party, to feel valued, to have felt supported, and to stay with those seats so they can build them up over time. I had a concern that if we didn't support them and don't continue to support them, then we are going to keep having this wastage of talent and institutional knowledge, which the General Election Review has said is one of the issues for why we haven't been building forwards over the last 10 years. We need to change the tide on that.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
That was very helpful. Layla, I want to honour you for having brought up the issues that you've actually had to deal with over the years, because I think that's really relevant, and I'm glad that you brought them up, and you brought them up and have dealt with them. On a slightly sideways note, what I wanted to say, apart from that, is that if it isn't running through fields of wheat, what would you say is the worst thing that you've ever done?
The worst thing I've ever done?
To bring it to a close. To
bring us to a close, as a final thing. Well, yeah, I did have this question from, I did a Sunday Times feature actually a couple of weeks ago, which was talking about, and this question came up, and the story I gave wasn't printed, was actually one from my teenage years. And we lived in Jamaica at the time, which was fantastic. We moved there when I was 11 until I was 16. And however, perhaps not the safest place. We had, guards at our door and grills on our windows. And my parents were obviously very protective. And it's the kind of place where, unless you really know where you're going, you don't really tend to go, certainly without your parents' knowledge as a 15-year-old girl. But one day I did decide with my friends that we were going to go and explore the dance hall culture of downtown Jamaica. And in Kingston, that was maybe not the best thing to do. I'll tell you what, I had a blast. I was really into the music at the time. It was amazing. I obviously didn't tell my parents, and this might be the first time that they will find out. So
that's okay. Sounds a lot like my upbringing. I'm really happy with that. Thank you. Layla, thank you so much for your time and your attention, and the detail, and for spending time with us today and allowing us to question you and learn more about you as well.
Yes, thank you.